I went through 2000 years of history trying to find the worst king ever handed a crown, but after everything I read, I couldn't. Because somehow, three of them managed to outdo each other. The French monarchy survived the lots of Louis if you think about it, until this one. Now, don't get me wrong, Louis was a nice guy, the kind you would trust to water your plants, not run your country, especially if it was 1774's France. You see, the 7 Years' War was a grand oops for the French. They lost most of their overseas colonies and now had massive debts to pay. So when 20-year-old Louis took the throne, France needed a decisive reformer, a man ready to fight corruption and rescue a sinking economy. But Louis was none of that. In fact, he was so indecisive that people started printing pamphlets mocking him for not being able to perform with his queen, the equally infamous Marie Antoinette. Every crisis became a royal waiting game. Should he tax the nobility instead of the starving peasants? Maybe not. Cut spending on lavish parties? Not so sure. Funding the American Revolution against the British? Absolutely. Yes, Louis actually did this. And even though Louis had some solid advisors like Jacques Necker or Charles-Alexandre de Colonne, the second they suggested cutting back on the champagne and fireworks, the nobles lost their minds. And Louis, too scared to upset the party crowd, fired his reformers instead. So, in a move of pure desperation, Louis called the States General in 1789, a national assembly of France's most powerful men that hadn't been summoned in over 150 years. Here's how it worked. Since the Middle Ages, French society had been split into three states. The first estate, the clergy, the second, the nobility, and the third estate, basically everyone else. Each state got one vote on how to fix France. But here was the problem. The clergy and nobility made up about 2% of the population, and the third estate was the other 98%. So yeah, the math didn't exactly scream fair. So when the third estate realized that every time they tried to tax the nobles and clergy, the guys actually spending all the money and paying none of it, they would get outvoted 2-1, they just said screw it and made their own assembly. And suddenly the whole French Revolution thing was now hot. Soon, France fell into complete chaos. One day the peasants stormed the Bastille and paraded the captain's head on a pike. The next, they were raiding bakeries just to get a loaf of bread. The revolution had officially begun, and there was no putting it back in the box. Every day more people were inspired by Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau and Voltaire, demanding an end to the ancient regime. The monarchy they blamed for everything. In response, Louis surrounded Paris with his army. I mean gosh, come on Louis, when was putting guns at your own capital a good move? The revolutionaries eventually got fed up with their king being an out-of-touch imbecile, so in October 1789, they dragged him from his shiny palace at Versailles and locked him up. Understandably, foreign monarchies like Austria and Prussia were not fans of this whole people overthrowing their king thing. For one, the Habsburgs in Austria were allied with the French crown. I know, big shocker. Marie Antoinette was literally their princess. And for another, they didn't want their own peasants getting any bright ideas, so they threatened to destroy Paris if anything happened to Louis. And that, my friends, did upset a lot of revolutionaries. Then Louis tried to escape with his family in 1791, but failed, which turned out to be a big mistake because it further cemented the idea that he was plotting with foreign monarchies to crush the revolution. So the revolutionaries charged him with treason and the guillotine did his thing. Now, this was an emperor, and if you're complaining an emperor is not a king, you are right, but it's time for you to grow up. Oh, Nero, where do we even start? His life began exactly how every Roman family drama does, with murder, politics, and mommy issues. His father died when he was 3, his mother Agrippina the Younger married Emperor Claudius, then probably poisoned him, then probably poisoned his son too, and what do you know, Nero's emperor now at 16. But Agrippina wasn't done. She had that I will rule through my son energy, trying to keep Nero as her puppet. But Nero wasn't exactly the mama's boy type either. As a teenager, he was tutored by the Stoic philosopher Seneca, the control your emotions guy, which clearly didn't stick, because Nero quickly became obsessed with theater, music and poetry. And by obsessed, I mean he would force senators to sit through his 6-hour musical performances. But the real drama began when Nero decided mom was cramping his style. After several failed assassination attempts, including one where he built her a boat designed to sink, he gave up on creativity and just had her stabbed to death. Sometimes the classics just work. After that, the empire turned into a one-man talent show. Nero loved performing in public, racing chariots, acting in plays, even dressing up as a bride during one of his own weddings. The common people loved it. Free entertainment. The elites, not so much. Mostly because when Nero actually did try to govern, it didn't go so great. He kicked his pregnant wife to death, then forced a slave boy to dress up like her. He executed rival senators, bankrupted nobles, and confiscated the wealth of anyone he accused of treason, which conveniently included anyone richer than him. And then came the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. It burned for 6 days, destroying most of the city. Ancient historians claim Nero played music while Rome burned. That's probably not true, but what is true is that once the flames died, Nero seized the ruins and built himself a massive palace called Domus Aurea. It had gardens, artificial lakes, and a 100-foot statue of him. He called it a home finally worthy of a man. Naturally, that pissed off a lot of people. So Nero needed a scapegoat. Enter the Christians, a tiny, unpopular group at the time. He accused them of starting the fire and unleashed one of history's first persecutions on them. Many were crucified or burned alive, lighting his gardens at night. It was brutal, and it didn't save his reputation. The Christians understandably called him the Antichrist, and rebellions started popping up everywhere. Gaul, Spain, Judea, even in the Senate. One by one, his supporters turned on him. Finally, abandoned by his guards, Nero fled the city. According to legend, as soldiers closed in, he muttered, "What an artist dies in me," and then took his own life. So far, we've seen a guy who should have become a gardener and Kurt Cobain. Obviously not good options for heads of state, but our third and final king, he somehow managed to redefine what it meant to be a bad ruler. Edward II was the son and successor of Edward I. Papa Edward was a brilliant warrior king who conquered Wales and terrorized Scotland. Edward II, on the other hand, couldn't conquer his own intrusive thoughts. He lacked his father's brain, backbone, and basic sense of leadership. When he became king in 1307, his first royal act was bringing back his best buddy, Piers Gaveston, from exile in France. Gaveston was charming, flashy, and a skilled knight. The two were inseparable, and Gaveston's influence over the king, let's just say, didn't exactly inspire confidence among England's nobles. Some even say they were lovers. And honestly, the evidence wasn't subtle. When Edward married Isabella, the daughter of the King of France, he spent most of his wedding chatting and laughing with Gaveston instead of, his bride. That didn't sit well with anyone, especially the English nobles, who were already sick of Gaveston's arrogance and the king's obsession with him. Eventually, they would have enough. They forced Edward to give up much of his authority and banished Gaveston from England in 1311. They also warned that if Gaveston ever set foot in England again, he would be declared a traitor and executed. And sure enough, not long after, Edward brought him back. And there went Gaveston's head. Edward was furious, like a kid who couldn't see past what he wanted right now. So, in his anger, he turned to a new group of allies called the Despensers. Their leader, Hugh Despenser, quickly became Edward's new favorite. Edward showered him with power and titles, and in return, Hugh helped him go after Gaveston's killer, none other than Thomas of Lancaster, the most powerful earl in England. But Edward's attention was soon drawn to Scotland. England and Scotland had been stabbing each other for decades at this point, and when the Scots decided to reignite the fun, Edward saw an opportunity. If he could pull off a big win like his father did, maybe he would earn back the nobles' respect, and then deal with Lancaster once and for all. Unfortunately for Edward, that plan stayed exactly what it was, a dream. At the infamous Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, his army got absolutely wrecked by the Scots, and naturally Edward blamed Lancaster. He was convinced Lancaster had been plotting with the enemy to sabotage him, which for once was actually true. When word spread that Lancaster had been working with the Scots, his support among the nobles collapsed. Edward seized the chance, captured him, and had him executed. But that wasn't the end of Edward's problems. Remember the Despensers? Well, let's just say they started grabbing land, titles, and money left and right in the name of the king. They rapidly expanded at the expense of other nobles, the most prominent one being Roger Mortimer. Roger rebelled against the king and forced Edward to exile the Despensers. But once things settled down, Edward brought them back, because apparently he hadn't learned his lesson. This time, however, Edward, with help from Hugh Despenser, surprised Roger and locked him up in the Tower of London in 1322. But once again, Edward's terrible judgment came back to bite him. The Despensers turned their claws on the queen herself, Isabella of France. Now the sister of the new French king, they seized her lands, attacked her household, and even took her children away. That was the last straw for the queen. She went to France, supposedly to discuss peace terms on Edward's behalf. But once there, she met the now escaped Roger Mortimer. The two became lovers, and both, tired of Edward's disaster of a reign, decided to invade England. And guess what? Practically everyone sided with them. The nobles, the clergy, even Edward's own men started switching teams. Within weeks, his regime collapsed. Edward fled, was captured and forced to abdicate in favor of his teenage son, Edward III. He was imprisoned and died under mysterious circumstances in 1327. How convenient.